Middlemarch by George Elliot, pen name for Mary Kay Evans. In the comments, what do people do with their book covers? I leave the book. Is it bad form? Is it impolite? Is it not acceptable to leave the book cover on? Because if I take it off, I'm going to lose it. But if I keep it on the book while I'm reading it, it's going to get beaten up and torn and stuff like that. So I don't know. In the comments, how do you roll? What's your feeling on book covers? On the little paper covers for them. Anyway, as I said, Middlemarch. Actually, I didn't essay, but Middlemarch slaps so hard. Such a good novel, just really exceptional. I really think probably the best. I think almost certainly the best novel in the English language. Maybe the best novel in the world. What makes it so exceptional? Several things. Incredibly well written. The writing's absolutely spectacular, and it's consistent. There are of course passages, there are of course moments that rise above others, although just the baseline is so high. The quality is so good, and as I say, consistent. There aren't flashes of brilliance. The entire thing, the writing, I think is just completely brilliant and exceptional. I should probably say, before I continue lauding it, before I continue praising it to the skies, I should probably say something about what it actually is. It's a novel. It's a 19th century novel. It's from kind of the golden age of novels. As I said, it's set 1832. It's got to be, I think that would actually be the year the English Reform Bill of that time is being discussed. It comes up. It's a live issue. I think one of the reasons to really, I think one of the things that Middlemarch does so well, a lot of people have argued that the novel is the modern epic, or the novel is the modern form of the epic. An epic poem, an epic story is a story of a people. It's a story of a civilization. It's a story of a nation. The most obvious, or probably the most well-known example would be the Old Testament. The Old Testament is an epic story. It's an epic tale of the Jewish people and their relationship, or their relationship to God, their relationship to the God of the Old Testament. The Iliad, the Odyssey, these are also epics. These they very much are. They're stories that tell you about a people, tell you about a nation. So they tell you about the Jewish people, or they tell you about the Greeks. What is the way of life? What is valued? What is important? And one could quibble about this. One could challenge this. That would be fine. It's about a people that they're uniform enough, and whether they were in reality, maybe they're enough alike. They're not multicultural. There's not divisions among them such that they have different cultures. They have a shared culture. They have a shared civilization. They have a shared way of life. Their values are shared. They will disagree about things. They will argue. Right? They will go to war. Well, they may not. They probably can't go to war with amongst themselves. Civil war is probably out for the epic. Perhaps. I won't get into that. You may see them involved in conflict with other nations, other peoples, which would make sense. In conflict between nations, between peoples, values. What you value is going to become apparent. What are you willing to fight for? What are you willing to go to war for? What are you willing to defend? Again, it occurs to me, however, probably the best example of an epic, although it's not a true epic, Star Wars, in a lot of ways, is an epic tale. It takes place in the past. That's often a key aspect of that's often a central that's often a feature of an epic. It takes place in the past. It takes place in the mythic past, and it's often, well, or it can be. There's the founding. There's the beginning of a civilization. So I guess the rebel forces rising up against the empire and the nation that will result from that. Dune also has some epic qualities. Although these are not pure. There's very much novel. They're very much novels. There's very much elements of the novel in them. But to get to the point, to address what a novel is, and why it's seen as the modern form of an epic. In 1832 in Britain, it's hard. It would have been hard to tell the tale of. It would be hard to tell an epic. It would be hard to construct an epic of the British people. Not hard. It's when civilizations, when countries become diverse, when there are diverse point of views, when there's not so much shared culture, shared values. The epic is not really. The epic's not really available to you as an author, and what it seems the transition is made to a novel that is about a town, that is about a community, a relatively small, a community within a larger nation, within a larger whole. And it's the values of that town. It's the prevailing mores of that town, of that place. It's about what that town values, the way of life that it embraces, the way of life that the individuals in that town and that small community engage in. And in some way, it's often, I shouldn't say often, but it's to some degree perhaps cut off from the wider world. The novel in this form is primarily preoccupied with this place, this town, maybe this city, the city might be getting too big. The point is that Middlemarch is a good illustration of this. Middlemarch is a relatively small English town, and the novel is in many ways a treatment, the novel brings the entirety of the town of Middlemarch before you. It shows what is this town like? What are the values of the people in this town? What is their way of life? What are their mores? How do they conduct themselves? What is important to them? What do they value? On what points are there conflicts? Middlemarch, in that way, I really think it's the shared culture, the shared values. There will be people in Middlemarch or in the novel who fall short, who do not live up to the ideals, people who behave badly in novels. But there's not really a question, there's not disagreement really about the values, about what the values of this place should be. Middlemarch, however, is somewhat complicated in that regard because, and this would be, I'd probably have to get into this later. I will get into it later. There's a questioning by Elliot. There's a pretty strong question in the novel about whether or not the way things are done, whether or not the way things are customarily done in this town, in this place, whether or not the way the practices, the traditions that they have, there's a rather glaring problem that comes up, specifically having to do, I think you could say, with the position of women, women's rights, what place, what role, what women will do, what part women will play in this society. Let me just add quickly, Novels, now this kind of novel is, I don't think you find it that much anymore. Novels, as far as I can see, largely are biographies now. A novel is a story, it's a biography about a certain character, maybe several characters, but it's taken up with the different. Game of Thrones might be a particularly recent or vivid example. You have all those characters, all those biographies. This is what happens to this character. This is their arc. This is what they do. They start here and they stop here. That's also something very characteristic of a novel. A novel has a beginning and a novel has an end. Epics are not really so much that way. The Iliad, for example, is not really a beginning or an end. It picks up. It's a part of a larger action, namely the war between the Achaeans and the Trojans, the taking the assault on Troy. It's a part of it, and it doesn't really come to a conclusion. It doesn't really end. In part, that's because everyone would know the story. Everyone would know how the story would end, and it's not crucial in an epic. You're telling the life, you're telling the values, you're talking about this nation, this people. Don't necessarily need to have a beginning and an end. Biographies have beginnings and ends. You're born and then you die, or you begin at this place and you end up at this place. Harry Potter goes to Hogwarts. Harry Potter leaves Hogwarts in the end. Harry Potter is in conflict with Voldemort. Conflict is resolved, beginning, end. So that is characteristic of novels. And as I said, novels really, from what I can see, really they become biographies. So to turn briefly in the time I have, my dog is going to come bother me quite soon to go to the dog park, which will actually be pretty cool because I can go there and draw some and work on anatomy. It's actually ridiculously warm for December, but Middlemarch, perhaps the best way to explain it is, it's a Who Should the Pretty Girl Marry book. It's like a Jane Austen novel in that way. It's taken up with characters. Let's say they're 20-somethings, and I think that's right. And it's an interesting time in a person's life. It's an interesting time in a young person's life, which is a very nice thing about Middlemarch. It's a young person's book. That's a very attractive feature of it. But it's taken up with young 20-somethings, and they are at the point that they have to make decisions. They're going to have to make some decisions. And in the case of the women that we're concerned with, Dorothea Brooke and Rosamund Vinci, Celia Brooke, in particular Mary Garth, they're receiving offers. They're the offers of marriage. And it's time. It's time to make a decision, and it's a momentous decision. It's a huge decision. These marriages are going to last, right? This is not going to end in a quickie divorce. These are not going to be starter marriages. These are going to last, and moreover, it's in an odd way, it's the main thing that these women will do in their lives. It is kind of the biggest decision that they will make, and to the degree, now there can be questions about how much control do they really have, how much say do they really have in the matter. In Middlemarch, they seem to have a decent amount, although that's complicated. We could discuss that. But in Middlemarch, the women do make the decisions. They marry. Dorothea marries, Celia marries, Rosamund marries, Mary Garth weds, and they're willing, or they marry the men that they have chosen. So as I say, it's a Who Should the Pretty Girl Marry novel, and That's not surprising. A lot of Jane Austen novels, you're going to find a lot of novels like this. It's a momentous decision. It's a big deal. It's an important question. And so a lot of Middlemarch is going to be taken up with that. I mean, there are many different ways, there are many sort of different perspectives you could take on this novel, but one of them is that you could take it as, you could look upon it as the biographies of these various women, who they choose to marry, what are the results, what are the consequences, good and bad, of those decisions. By the same token, it's also taken up with the biographies, or the stories of men, specifically the men, and in particular, of course, the men to whom these women wed, the men these women wed. It's taken up with them, with their concerns. There's a whole panoply, right? There's a whole multitude of characters that you encounter in Middlemarch, and the net. One of the overall results is that you come to see a depiction of this way of life, what is valued, what's important, and you can see why marriage is going to be a particularly good way of approaching that question. It's a big deal. As I said, getting married is going to have serious consequences. These are not starter marriages. You're not getting out of this, right? This union's gonna last. This thing's barring extraordinary circumstances, this union is going to persist. And you're going to make the decision to marry based in part on what do you value, right? What is it that is valuable in this union? What is it that is necessary? What is it that is required for a good life? That perhaps is, I probably shouldn't even say perhaps, that's a crucial part of this. You're marrying to have a better life. Being married will, right, for these women, or the idea is like this will be a life that is better than not being married. Right? And that raises the question, what are the advantages of the marriage? What is important in this? How will it benefit the women? How will it benefit the men? What is it that people value in this institution? Because that's going to tell you a great deal about what the people of Middlemarch value. And there are of course other pursuits that they engage in. There are other politics, science, there are other activities in which you see them taking part. But again, these activities reveal what the values, what the inhabitants of this town regard as an acceptable or a good life. These activities are not worth undertaking. It's not worth engaging these institutions, these practices. It's not worth doing these activities, doing these things, if they don't have value, if they're not worthwhile. And why are they of value? So that is part of the brilliance. That's part of the brilliance of Middlemarch. That's what I'll say about it today, and come back to it later. Thanks.